I'm going to go through 3 sheets of overhead paper because the College Board talks a lot about extinction and endangerment. If I were you, I would just put it with your endangered species assignment. But wherever you want to have these notes is fine by me.
Is that like the name of the notes?
I usually call it the extinction lecture, but you can call it whatever you want from your notes. First thing I'd like to point out, extinct means there's none left. Extinct in the wild means what you think it means. Functional extinction means 2 separate things. Some people say functional extinction means when there aren't enough to do an ecological function. Like there are some pollinators around, but the flowers aren't getting pollinated because it's not enough to do that job anymore. That's functional extinction. But when I went to university, functional extinction meant something different. We said functional extinction was when you have some individuals of the species left, but the species is no longer going to continue. Like there's a male in that country and a female in this country, but they're not going to see each other, so they're going to go extinct. Or we have 3 females left, but nobody to give them pollen, so there'll never be more seeds. Like the cycads at Lotus Land that some of you see on the tour where they go on the path and behind the little pond, they say that thing is extinct. How many of you have seen that on the Lotus Land tour? There's 3 cycads in the back of the pond. They look like little miniature palm trees. And those are extinct because all 3 of the remaining individuals are female.
Wait, so those are the last 3 in the world?
Yeah, they're the last 3 in the world. So they're extinct in the wild, and they're what I was trained to mean functionally extinct. Which means they might as well be gone because with only 3 females, there's never going to be another one. Yeah?
Do you know which definition the College Board likes better, or?
I don't. Yeah?
Yeah, I was going to ask what you would call it.
I just want to warn you about this 2 different uses of the word. Luke, I just got your message somehow. Thanks anyhow. Luke! Luke! I just got your message now. Thanks anyway. Yeah?
Will we ever get a question that's like, what does functionally extinct mean? And it will have both of those?
Bro, I don't know. I'm pointing out that I realize there are 2 different meanings for this word. If that makes you nervous, imagine like the onslaught of helicopter parents that are going to come at me when that's on the test, so it makes me nervous too. You guys have no idea how nervous it makes me. All right. Different kinds of extinction, fine. When a species is endangered, we know it's going to go extinct unless something changes. That's what it means. Endangered is going to go extinct unless, we do something different. And globally today, if I'm not mistaken, there's like 11,000 species that are gonna go extinct if we don't change something. So endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, or functionally extinct. I believe it's more than 10, but less than 11, somewhere around 11,000. And you know what's interesting to remember? We don't know all the species on the planet. Depending on whose estimate you like, we might know maybe 10% of the species that currently exist on our planet. There's a lot of environments where we don't really understand which species is which species, and there's a lot of new species found every day. Somebody came up with an estimate that in some parts of distant rainforest, if you shake a tree, as many as 5 new species will fall out. Because there's like so many weird little flies and weird little beetles that we don't know yet. So imagine if of the species we know, 10 or 11,000 are endangered, then we could extrapolate that of a much bigger number. Maybe there's a lot there that are endangered too, we just don't realize it yet. And so some people say that there's as many as 150,000 endangered species. In some environments, the change is going to happen so quickly that we'll never even know what went extinct. Who knows Colin? Fabian, you know Colin. Tell him he owes me a back scratcher. Scumbag. Yeah.
How do you make a distinction between one species and another? Because you're saying like there's.
This is a really long esoteric question. I'll give you the short answer. They cannot breed successfully. So me and dogs, different species, we've tried.
Whoa.
Alright.
Little peanut butter trick.
There's a lot of, there's some weird overlap between species definitions. So it's actually like, we could go down the wormhole and this becomes like a year of talking and we still don't settle on it. There's some debate, because tigers and lions can make a baby.
They can?
Lion.
Really? So
But
cute.
they can't, those tigers can't reproduce. And so it's not considered.
Yeah.
Liger and Tyon,
Tyon?
Depends who's the mom and who's the dad.
I thought a liger was like a joke and somebody told me what that.
Anyway, I told you this was a big endless conversation. No. Moving on. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So.
first thing in your notes, extinction happens all the time and it's natural. It's natural because, evolution happens. Evolution happens. So one species will just replace another one and the losers go extinct. This happens all the time. Some fish starts doing the thing better than the other fish and it outcompetes the other fish and that fish loses. So natural selection's happening all the time. And by the way, our systems are changing all the time. So like the California condor should have gone extinct even if it wasn't our fault. The California condor is a leftover of a previous ecosystem that's no longer available to the condor. So nature has changed in a way that the condor would have gone extinct if we hadn't messed with them to accelerate it, and if we hadn't messed with them to save it, they would have still gone extinct.
So do you think it's ethically right to save them?
I don't know. I mean, ethically, I can see the point of reversing our role in that. You could never predict the future, so who knows? Maybe climate would have changed again somehow and it could have survived. But it looks like a species that was in a rapid decline anyhow. Yeah, ethically, I like to clean up my messes sometimes when there's people watching. It's also important to point out that extinction sometimes happens bigly. We call those mass extinctions. The fossil record has 5 of them. And from the fossil record, we know something really critically important that you must have in your notes. All mass extinctions were caused by rapid climate change. Another way to say that is the only way to have a mass extinction is rapid climate change. Little climate change, not a big deal because species evolved. Slow climate change, not a big deal because species evolved. Yeah.
So like when the meteor hit, it wasn't the meteor that like killed everything, it's like the smoke and stuff.
That's right, yeah. So all meteors and all volcanoes, if they're big enough, change the composition of the atmosphere. And that usually takes like 5, 6, 7, 800 years to settle down. So like, I'll bet you that there was a dinosaur where the meteor hit. Like, the day of the meteor strike must have killed something. And actually the day after the meteor strike, there was like big volcanic activity in the Himalaya. Do you all know that if you hit a watermelon with a hammer, watermelon juice comes out of the back of the watermelon? Because fluid dynamics. Fluid dynamics. You have a liquid inside of a solid, so when you displace it on this side, stuff goes like that. So when the meteor hit next to Mexico, the Himalayas broke open on the other side of the planet.
It's like the king kind of truck in the air. It's really pops like that.
Yeah, like that. And so, yeah, I'll bet you something got hit by a meteor, and I'll bet you something got hit on the other side. And then the dinosaurs went extinct, like every individual of many species disappeared over hundreds of years of climate change.
But not sharks.
But not sharks, right? And not alligators, and not tree shrews. Alright. The fossil record is amazing. Investigative scientists can look back, please look up, and we find mass extinction, mass extinction, mass extinction, mass extinction, mass extinction, from meteor, I can't remember, volcano, meteor, volcano. If you look here, this is the same thing. So here's the history of life on Earth. Here's the history of life on Earth with novelties and evolution, with what the continents look like, with what's happening in a variety of other markers of time. And here, these big red dots are the geologic events. So, the largest geologic event we've ever had on Earth was the largest mass extinction, because that was the biggest shuffling of climate. It was a big volcano in what is now the gap between Russia and Alaska.
So you have sudden question mark, does it depend, or is it, like, are mass extinctions only sudden, or do they happen, like?
So the question is, are these catastrophic mass extinctions all at once? And the answer is no, they are sudden by climate change standards, so we're talking like hundreds of years. Climate change is usually millennial. Like the temperature changes 1 degree over 1,000 years. And you know, like evolution can kind of keep up with that. In one generation, the change is like 1/100 of a degree or something, like you can do that. Yeah.
Is it harder for aquatic species to go extinct during the mass extinction because they have an underwater climate and the air?
So there's a lot of different ways to answer that. Generally, aquatic species are more screwed during a mass extinction event. You're right that water has a higher thermal heat capacity, so you would think it's a good insulator, but that also means that when you heat up the planet, the thing that heats it the most is the water, because heat goes to water more.
So they basically get boiled.
So like global climate change now is very difficult to measure in atmospheric averages, but it's really obvious in water averages. Another thing that happens is when you change chemistry, you change water quality, because everything gets washed by water. Like our whole planet is water pollution. And so anything that you change in the system is seen in the water. Water tends to exaggerate mass extinction. Yeah? Okay. When you take all the meteors and the volcanoes and all of the little tiny extinction events and you just average it out, if you just look through history, we've lost about 2 species a year. So in 600 million years, we've lost 1.2 billion species. And if we've lost 1.2 billion, that means about 99.5% of all the life on Earth is already extinct. Of all the species we've ever had, most of them are extinct by now. So we're just looking at the 2019 moment, a blip in diversity. At least 2 of these species would have been gone by next year. And 2 more would be gone the year after. And it's probably safe to assume that a couple new species are popping up. It's just tough to decide when you're going to call a new species. That's the background rate or the base level rate. That number is kind of important, 2 per year. If you're thinking 2 species per year, but there's 11,000 endangered right now, then obviously there has to be something else going on, and that other thing is meat. Because all the natural extinctions are chump change, humans are really good at extinction. For one thing, what?
Do you think like humans are gonna make the planet like uninhabitable for anything
No.
in the future, or like eventually like new things will start to
That,
adapt?
the other part. I mean, what do I know? But the way I think of it is the second thing you said. First and foremost, we mess up habitat. And remember, habitat loss is not very specific. To lose a habitat, what does that actually mean? Like you got something left. If you cut down the forest, you've lost the trees, but you still have the sand or something. So the right way to say this is not habitat loss, it's habitat degradation. That's more specific. To degrade, degradation, that's more accurate. Habitat degradation is when we mess up the habitat. Like you develop it, or you cut it into pieces, or you just make it really sucky by taking out ingredients, or you break relationships in that habitat. You get rid of the pollinators, so the flower just can't survive anymore. Or you get rid of the food source, so the ducks can't eat anymore. So, I don't know how you people hold in your sneezes. It seems a human practice. I don't understand.
No, you need to though.
Hold in your sneezes?
Yeah, I just do. Weird. It's weird.
It's like the man keeping you down. Don't be afraid to be you, man. Let the flag fly. Habitat loss is by far the worst thing we do because we use this planet up. Humans have impacted roughly 72% of all the land on Earth. We dominate just around half of all the land on Earth. The only places that we haven't impacted are those that are covered in ice and some of those covered in snow. Everything else, if it's not covered in ice, or part of the land that isn't covered in sand, everything else we've impacted. And we dominate right around half of the planet. Almost every inch of grassland, almost every inch of coastline, most of the forests. So there's not much left. We've changed the chemistry of all the oceans and all the lakes and all the rivers and all the ponds, so that's all impacted too. It's worse for aquatic ecosystems. We changed the chemistry of the deep sea, we don't even know what's down there. And there's this really fascinating and complicated relationship between habitat area and the number of species, and I don't want you to draw it yet. Don't draw. Don't draw. Do not draw. Don't draw that yet. Because you don't need all parts of that, and after I explain it, it's pretty easy to look at your drawing. But please don't draw this yet. It'll be up on the board for at least a few minutes. Please don't draw this yet. Look. I'm going to go super slow, and if you're drawing, then you'd get confused, so don't draw it. Watch. This says percent of habitat lost from 0 to 100, and percent of species left from 0 to 100. So that's 50% of habitat is lost, and that's 50% of species are left. And the extremes should be obvious. If you've lost all the habitat, then you probably have 0% of the species left. Makes sense. If you've lost none of the habitat, then you should have all your species left. The extremes are obvious. Now, the red line you should not draw. The red line is what we call a linear relationship. Linear means what happens in one is proportional in the other. Linear relationship. And this is not a linear relationship. So you don't have to draw that. If it was linear, you give up half the habitat and you would lose half the species. But that doesn't make any sense. Giving up half the habitat should not cost you half your species. I can explain why. Watch this. Look at my hands. This classroom is our total habitat. The species here are humans. If I lose 1/2 of the habitat, how many species have I lost? Because what's over there? More humans. Do we all agree that I've lost half the individuals? So species shrink, population goes down, but species diversity does not. Agreed? If you're looking at the Santa Barbara Hills, there's black bears and mountain lions, coyotes and raccoons, mice, snakes, seagulls, moles and voles and lizards and ants and crickets and spiders. And if you lose half of the Santa Barbara habitat, chances are you've still got all those species on the remaining bit of habitat. Right? If you lost that half of the habitat and there was no more yellow sticky monkey flower, then what do we know about the yellow sticky monkey flower? Yeah, it's extinct, B, it probably had a small habitat, and so it lost the only part of its habitat. That was possible. But almost every species in the Santa Barbara Hills would remain when we give up 1/2 of our Santa Barbara Hills habitat, because all those species are still found in the remaining bit of habitat. Yeah.
So like, say like going back to using this room as an example, and if we lose like this half the habitat, would there ever be a case where they would just come over here, so it would be more crowded, but like...
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, most of that would eventually buffer down because you can only fit so many individuals per square mile of habitat, but some of them might try to escape if it's a slow loss of habitat, sure. Now, please look up. When we lose 1/2 of the habitat, we would probably have, if not all the species, almost all the species. You could even give up 60% and still have most of your species. 70%, you still have most of your species. Watch me, 80%, 90%, I still have the same species. But eventually you get to this point where your last 10%, that's really important. That's like Noah's Ark. The last 10% is like a life raft of diversity. Here's why I mentioned this. There's something really important going on. Habitat land area is not very important to diversity when it's a common habitat. But habitat land area is extremely critical for diversity when it's the last little chunk. There's a project right now where people are trying to spend like $120 million on 20 acres of grassland in Illinois. And it's like 20 acres, $120 million. And all the hippies are like, that's actually the last piece of prairie that was never touched. It's the last Noah's Ark of American prairie. So it's super valuable because it's the last one. Like the Naples coast, how many of you know what I'm talking about? Naples? We've served the Naples Reef. There's like a little private property on Gaviota Coast that that this owner wanted to make into apartment buildings. And everybody got all nervous and they're like, no, you gotta protect that. It's the last piece of coastal chaparral anywhere. Please look up. The species area effect says habitat is more important for diversity when that habitat is rare. You can give up the first half, no problem, no impact on diversity. But the last 10% is much more important than the first 50%. As the habitat becomes more rare, it becomes more valuable to diversity. Now I'm just going to kick back for a sec, and you guys can change whatever you needed from that drawing or whatever notes you want to keep. That's fucking classic. You understand what I said about collecting the field trip papers tomorrow? The medical checklist by period, and they all live in this box lid over here. This is my field trip box, so they're all going to go over here. All right. Species area effect says habitat is more critical to diversity when that habitat is more rare. Common habitat doesn't have much impact on species diversity.
Should we draw the picture now?
Yeah, sure. Oh, and take a quick break. Raise your hand if your species was threatened by a habitat issue. Raise your hand if your species was threatened by a habitat issue. Now look around. That's basically everybody. All my periods, all species, it's always habitat. Habitat's the big one. It's the number one problem. Number one problem for fish, for amphibians, for birds, for insects, for plants, for mammals. Number one. Always habitat problems. Yeah?
Is it then like after habitat, like overhunting? Is it the next one?
Oh, then there's kind of a toss-up, but pollution is a big one. Keep in mind, kids, I forced you to choose obscure endangered species. The whole point of that list that had 3 periods worth of kids, the only reason I did this was so I could just make that point I just made. Look, there is no statistical bias. You did not all get to choose the panda bear and the blue whale. You did not do the same species twice. This is clean statistics. Almost every endangered species, because you have a good random sample, almost every endangered species is endangered because of habitat. It's the only reason we do this. Now we can do it. There's other reasons, yeah.
You were saying before that it was that the red line is kind of like a linear
Yeah.
rate of decline. Would this be more of a logarithmic?
Correct. Or exponential, yes. So it's proportional to its scarcity. It depends on another variable. Invasive species you already understand because on Tuesday we had a whole conversation about them. Invasive species will outcompete or will out-eat or out-poison or will shake up ecosystems. How many of your endangered species was threatened by an invasive one? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Credible. What about pollution? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are all 7? Are all those aquatic?
It lives in the wetlands.
That counts. You say no? What was yours?
Rhinoceros.
Threatened by pollution, huh? I didn't know this. Fascinating. What kind of pollution, just out of curiosity?
They're building like a bunch of stuff around the park they're all living in, so air pollution.
Wow, that's news to me. Interesting. Anybody else have pollution that's not aquatic? Leventhal, this is the point I was trying to make, that usually all pollution becomes aquatic pollution, so aquatic systems are more vulnerable to mass extinctions. Yours not really?
Kind of. You know, it's a fox, and it's affected by the production of like the wood industry and stuff. But not really pollution. It's more of the buildings.
Okay, that's a habitat issue, I would say.
Yeah.
Key distinction here, children. Poaching is when the person killing the animal knows it's illegal. So this is knowingly illegal. As opposed to over-harvesting, which is killing too many but not realizing it should be illegal. Like not having knowledge that it's bad for that species. So poaching is like when you know you're not supposed to kill the elephant because it's protected and endangered, but you kill one anyway because you want the ivory. And over harvesting is like, yeah, I'm not breaking the law. Maybe we're running out of lingcod, but I'm following the rules. It's not my fault that the rules are bad. Raise your hands for poaching. Are those all mammals?
No, mine's a fish.
A fish? What fish?
The sturgeon.
Oh, yes, caviar.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a mammal? Everybody else had a mammal for the poaching? Because fur? Man, we just think stuff is cute, so we kill it. Like Lenny. That's really awesome. Oh, I love this.
I just thought from that mice and
Did I just give away the punchline right there? Is that a spoiler? Spoiler alert. Sorry.
Yeah, I know, that's what
Alright.
So is the acronym HIPPO or is there?
Yeah, which itself is an endangered species. Yeah, hippo.
Hippos are so cute. I want a hippo so bad.
Too bad, they're endangered. Again, it's not an acronym, right? That's a homonym?
I think an acronym. No, acronym is like the name of a thing and you put it all together. Like.
You sure? Isn't that like FBI is an acronym?
Yeah, that's an acronym for like it's a name.
But this isn't HIPPO, it's also a word.
It's an acrostic code.
Okay, I give up. Alright.
We did like 6th grade.
They are the deadliest animal in Africa proportional to human contact.
Brother Bow.
Of all the things that you see in the wild, the most likely to kill you is a hippo.
I'm so scared.
Like if you see one, you're probably dead.
Yeah, that's why.
I follow this account on Instagram called Fiona the Baby Hippo, and it's such a cute
Kind of
little
moat with
hippo.
hippos.
And that's a pygmy hippo,
Yeah,
isn't
and
it?
that's what.
No, it's a big hippo. They just post pictures from when she was a hippo.
Ah.
I've
Wow.
seen a hippo run, and it's honestly terrifying. Like they're just like big and chubby, but they can run.
I know. They can run really fast. And you know what's gnarly? They're big and chubby, but they're hyprodynamic, so they don't slow down when they run through water. They run on the bottom at about the speed that they run on land.
How is it
Bet.
I got to pet a pygmy hippo because I bribed the zookeeper in another country.
What?
Yes.
Wait, what did you do? I hear it.
Because he cried.
Was they where?
In Argentina, as a matter of fact. Okay. Back to me.
Sadie, get off your phone.
Back to me. Oh my God. Back to me. I need to add a word called bushmeat. This is the right time. Throughout the year, I'm like, oh, where do I squeeze this concept into my class? Because someday the AP test said bushmeat, and all my kids were like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, okay, I'll throw it in the endangered. Bushmeat is when people eat something that's just found in their surroundings. So in Santa Barbara, it would be like eating raccoons and skunks and stuff. On the other hand, if you live in northern Australia, bushmeat would be eating the giant flying bat. And if you live in Costa Rica, it's eating howler monkeys. It's eating stuff that's just in your surroundings. And you know, sometimes that has huge impacts on biodiversity. Because if there aren't any other howler monkeys, then Costa Ricans are a primary cause of the extinction of the howler monkey, and they're just trying to eat. Howler monkeys are not going extinct. That was a bad example. I just talked to an old friend of mine who lives in Costa Rica now. He mentioned the howler monkeys are a pain. They keep him from sleeping at night. But the gorilla is a perfect example of bushmeat. People in Cameroon, their food supply has been disrupted by warfare, so they're so hungry that they'll go out and eat a gorilla. Important detail number 1, nobody likes to eat gorilla because it's not that tasty. Important detail number 2, nobody likes to hunt gorillas because they're scary as F. They'll kill you. Important information number 3, many Cameroonians have like a strange superstition about gorillas being sort of human. Because, you know, they're primates and they actually are pretty close to humans. And so here's the wacky thing. Bushmeat, for stuff like the gorilla, is 2 tragedies at once. A, it sucks that we're killing all the gorillas, but B, somebody's so hungry that they had to eat a gorilla. So when you really care about extinction, and you look across the map, it turns out we're eating all sorts of rare stuff. How many of your endangered are being eaten by humans? Look, we could solve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 species at least. 8 out of 30, a quarter of the species in this room. By just finding a way to move our spare food around. Of all the food grown on Earth, about 1/2 goes to waste. Of everything we grow, about 1/2 of the total food does not reach a consumer. Roughly 1/2. So I'm not saying like the crust on your sandwich, I'm talking like whole container ships worth of rice or whatever. Imagine, be like, oh, you're eating gorilla? How about a pallet of rice and beans? They'd be like, oh, thank God. I don't actually want to kill these gorillas because they scare me. Yeah, rice and gorilla. Oh, thank God. I'm getting so tired of the boring gorilla.
PG gorilla burritos.
I'm basically the worst person. All right. There's a term for that. All the ways that we kill stuff. Anthropogenic means we cause it. Humans cause it. And somewhere between 200 and 2,000 per year are dying because of us. We cause a lot of stuff to die. Now, if things keep going like they're going, when you turn 97 years old, our planet will have about 1/2 of the species it has now. Species. That's not just individuals. The other half are probably going to be reduced in population from anyone. But the idea that you might lose 1/2 of our planet's species in just 100 years, please look up, makes this one the biggest mass extinction ever.
Is that the Holocene?
Yeah, that's us. And what's interesting is we are not a geologic event. But what's even more interesting is we act like a geologic event. Because we're burning the rocks. Get it? We're taking the Earth's crust and we're grinding it up and we're putting it into these machines that burn the rocks like a volcano or like a meteor strike. We're the first smart geologic event. That's a crazy way to think about humans. Like, we're the first volcano that knew better. Like, the volcanoes don't know they're volcanoes. They're just like, and the meteors don't know better. They're just like, but then there's us, like, hey man, you know we're like a volcano? Yeah, let's keep doing it.
What if all the other extinctions were the aliens trying to prevent this from happening?
What if whose mom is what now? What?
Never mind.
I just didn't hear you.
What if all the other extinctions were caused by aliens trying to prevent this from happening?
If all the, that would be good. I'd be into that.
I don't think that's possible.
Maybe not, maybe not. I don't know. I also think humans are kind of amazing and beautiful. It's like, hey, but Beethoven. I mean, like, we are pretty neat. Like, all the backflips.
Nah.
Pull one, Matt.
Yeah,
But like, and like this is just
my shoulder literally popped when I did that. I'm so old. Yeah, what?
For the sake of like philosophical argument though, like if humans have like Beethoven and that type of stuff, humans also have like slavery and stuff, like weird species that-
Some good, some bad, also some volcano. Yeah. I'm not sure that a Beethoven is worth some slavery.
What about a Beethoven and Einstein?
Probably safe to say it's not. Yeah, but I'll see your Einstein, I'll raise you a Basquiat. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to value humanity, and I'm not trying to. I think it's important when we talk about ourselves as a group to remember that there is great evil. We're not just good. And also the stuff that we do which is harmful, that we do kind of by accident, is just like not thought, like we're not trying to be a volcano. It's like an unfortunate outcome of us just trying to be better at humans, and sometimes that was us trying to take care of our children better. So like,
As in,
there was
like-
probably thousands and thousands of moms and dads trying to do right by their baby girl and baby boy, like rad. And then the sum outcome of that is like, we're like a volcano. And like, I don't know, I'm just trying to say that like, I don't like to make it sound as if I've decided that humanity is bad.
Like those Cameroonians killing gorillas, like they're not doing it because they're bad, they're doing it because they have to.
Yeah, they're not like, ah, die, stupid gorilla. Like, it's not just pure horribleness. And so a lot of things have bad outcomes, but that's not necessarily the way to judge humanity. Yeah, I don't care what you do. Okay. Now this is something I need you to add to your notes. Thank God Leventhal is gone. These are the current causes of extinction due to humans. But when I teach your children, and yes, I'll still be here,
Hippo?
it'll be Chippo. Yeah, right now it's hippo, but when I teach your boys and girls, it'll be chippo.
What about fuck? What's the
It'll be chippo. Because climate change. C is for climate change in the future. And every time I talk about climate change, I have to take a little side trip. I got to take a little side trip. Whenever I talk about climate change, I need to remind you that there is not a single species on Earth that's going to die because the planet is 1 degree hotter. The change in temperature does not kill any species. Climate change will cause 0 direct temperature extinctions. 0. Please look up ducks. What's it called? TGA. Ducks' response to climate change is DGAF. They are not in the least bit bothered. You know what ducks do? As the planet gets 1 degree hotter, they show up one place and no, that's not good. So they fly a little bit further and their migratory routes shift north. And then they're okay. Flowers also don't care. You know, when the soil heats up earlier and it dries up earlier, they just sprout earlier. And again, the change in temperature does not kill the flowers. Moths don't mind when the planet is 1 degree hotter. Moths just move uphill in elevation. If all 3 of these species can respond to changing temperatures successfully, why will all 3 of them go extinct soon? What happens when the duck goes north, the flower comes up earlier, and the moths have moved uphill? What happens?
They affect the community level interactions around them, and so different things don't line up, and so everything dies.
They don't line up anymore? We've broken their arrows. This used to fertilize that, now it doesn't. This used to pollinate that, now it doesn't. So the flower has no fertilizer and no pollinator, and it will go extinct because it's lost community level interactions. It's lost relationships in its community. The moth used to eat nectar while it was pollinating. Now it's lost its only food source that matches the shape of its face. And without that food source, the moth goes extinct, which sucks because ducks used to eat this fruit and these larvae. And without that fruit and without that larva, the ducks have nothing to eat during their migration and they go extinct. There's a name for this. It's called ecosystem shear. And this is why climate change is going to replace habitat. Because climate change breaks all the relationships that hold together an ecosystem. Remember all those arrows that we drew for food? And I told you there's all these other arrows for habitat, all these other arrows for nutrient cycling, all these other arrows for predator regulating prey populations.
So ecosystem shear is the fact that they'll lose their community level interactions.
That's what it means, yeah. That species respond independently. So if we're going to lose 50% of our species, it's interesting to note that we kind of can tell which ones. We know who's going to go extinct. Big stuff, things that are useful to humans, things that are very sensitive, specialized, migratory, or genetically isolated. I want to explain in order, so please don't copy all of it at once. Please look up, being big is expensive. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of productivity, it takes a lot of space. So a good way to think about it is being big takes a lot of good luck. It takes a lot of stability for an elephant to make it to 20 before it has its first baby. It takes a lot of good luck for the elephant to have a second baby. It has to be 25. So every elephant needs 25 years just to replace itself in the population. That's a lot of luck. In a changing planet, something could go wrong in 25 years. It takes hundreds of acres to feed an elephant. They eat like 6 wheelbarrows full of food a day. So that's a lot of good luck, 25 years of acreage, giving 6 barrels of food a day or whatever. Being big is sketchy. It takes a lot of stability, a lot of good luck. Being useful to humans is a total death sentence, because anything we want, we will kill it. Can you imagine the snow leopard was just like minding its own business? Like chasing the abominable snowman through the snow, living in caves. Nobody ever even saw snow leopards until somebody's like, holy crap, look at that furry tail. I'd like to kill that thing and put that tail on my wife. And they did. You know, as a scarf or whatever. Jacket. Being useful to humans is a death sentence. How many of your species are going extinct because they're useful to humans? So all of those are on purpose. Remember, we could have stopped that. But we're just like, nah, I want to eat that, or I want to wear that, or I want to grind up that spleen and put it in my tea.
What?
What's
Which animal is that?
Oh, panda bear, tiger. Yeah, people grind up the testicles of tigers, dry it out and grind it up. People take the fins off sharks and make it into a really not very flavorful soup because they believe that it'll make you immune to cancer because sharks don't get cancer. But newsflash, sharks all die of cancer, and cancer is really common in sharks. So even if it were true, it would still be wrong. Duh. And meanwhile, humans are like killing all the sharks. Hooray! God forbid you're useful to humans. Hey, look, here, where it says hypersensitivity, I'd like you to add something in your notes. It is, quote, B plus B. Or B and B. Because the stuff that is most sensitive, like I was telling Sadie, the stuff that is most sensitive breeds and breathes in water. The biggest weakness is to need clean water. The most sensitive are those which breed or breathe in water. B and B. That's a really useful answer on the AP test. Comes up often. Breeding and breathing in water. Specialists are, of course, going to die because they're picky. Like, oh, I can only eat this one plant. What could possibly go wrong? Or, I can only live in this one very rare habitat type. What could possibly go wrong? Yesterday I found out that there's a frog that only lives on the Gold Coast of Australia. That's a crappy place to be a specialist because that is basically the Eastern Hemisphere's most expensive real estate. Good luck, frog. Migratory species need a lot of land. That should be obvious, right? Because you don't just rely on Santa Barbara, but you rely on San Diego and San Francisco and Seattle and Oregon, whatever. Like migratory species need many places to stay healthy. And we gotta talk about the genetics thing, yeah.
Yeah, what are usefulness to humans? Like pigs and cows are useful to human too, and they're not going to extinct, right?
Yeah, that's true, that's true. Some of the stuff that we've kind of like cultured it really carefully. It's so useful that we've been strategic about managing those populations. But don't forget that most of the stuff that we find useful, we don't manage very carefully. I mean, like, if a species is international, nobody's in charge. Like tuna, good luck trying to preserve tuna. Like, tuna's helpful to humans too. But like most of the places where tuna lives, nobody's in charge. And I gotta talk about this genetics thing. How many of you are done taking notes? Go fast. Look, I gotta talk about genetics. You can come back, I'll leave that on the board, but please look over here. There's something that we gotta shoehorn into this lecture as well. Look over here, I have a drawing for you. A big population has a lot of genetic diversity, but over time, if something shrinks the population, all the future population will only have the genetic diversity of the survivor. Does that make sense? Let's imagine that hair color was genetic in humans, which is kind of not, but theoretically. In this room, we've got like pretty light hair, we got some of those weird redheads, and there's like brown hair, and really dark hair, and pretty darn black hair too. Hey, we have some gray hair, because I'm in here. Okay, now, if this was just simple genetics, which it's not, but if this was simple genetics, if we take the one redhead and kick them to a separate island where they belong, to breed a new population of humans, well, all the new ones would all be redheads because the only genes that went to that new island.
High school dropout.
We call that thing that happens in genetics isolation, like one is separated, and founder effect. When you start a population with a redhead, all the babies will be redheads.
Let's hope that that never happens.
That they don't have babies? I know.
Even if we do have babies, the chances that they're gonna be redhead is very low.
Also, climate
Unless
change.
Mary is
No,
Even then,
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
It's 1 in 7.
Why?
Even if,
Is it
even
too
if
like
it's 2
sensitive
redheads.
for the?
You've been looking
What
into
about
it.
red?
We're going extinct.
It's about who's having the most babies, and temperature has something to do with which.
Well, I mean, twins out of
So there's a whole bunch of genes that are. Okay, stop! Hair color's not actually a genetic thing. I don't actually mind redheads. Shut up, Chloe. Okay. But the point is a good one. We're making up this thing because hair color is obvious and we all see it, and I think everybody believes me that it's not a single gene, right? Okay. So this is important, And the explanation of why this is important, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. This explanation is a critical species conservation topic. This comes up throughout the year. I'm introducing it now, but this will continue in later units, and it's a big problem. Please look up. High diversity might come in handy later for that species. If in the future there's a predator that cannot see black hair, some members of this population would survive, and thus humanity would continue. And if in the future there's a food that only comes to blonde people, some individuals in this population would survive in the future. And if there's a disease that only strikes brunettes, some humans would survive in the future. What we say is, high genetic diversity is like having a full toolbox. You have a lot of variables that might be useful later. We don't know if it's useful, but like me hoarding tools in the garage, who knows, maybe someday I'm going to need a cement drill. I don't really need it today, but I'm going to keep that because someday it might be handy. That's like genetics.
Like for drilling cement?
Yeah.
No.
Whereas, please look up, if a redhead starts a population of redheads, even if that makes 7.8 billion redheads, I know. Oh God, bro, shiver. Oh, okay, if that makes. Do you all know that everybody wants to be a redhead? It's the most common hair dye, by a lot.
Yeah, because some
By a lot. Almost exactly 1/2 of all hair dye is red hair dye.
My aunt dyes her hair red.
See? Okay.
I don't like it.
Old people always call me
No,
like
because it looks
I'll
weird
bet.
on her, that's why.
I'm out of time. I'm out of time. I have another slide. Look. Look. Genetic risk is when you have low diversity because you don't have the tools to survive a changing environment. Those species always go extinct because they're fragile.
So the redheads would go extinct.
If all we had was just blondes or just redheads or just brunettes, yeah. And so then it's interesting to wonder, like, who's left? What's the opposite of that list? You know, they're like small generalists, common, hardy. They breed fast, they're omnivorous, they're not really picky. That's what we call weeds. Pests. After this big mass extinction, we're going to have rats and crabgrass and ice plant and ants. Almost half the ocean's biomass has become jellyfish because we killed all the rest. So the ocean is just swarming with jellyfish because we don't have a use for them. It's like, oh no, you're safe, you're just gross and scary. So the ocean is just swarming with jellyfish. There's probably 600 times more jellyfish now than there was when Columbus sailed on that ocean.
Good, because they're really cute.
We should eat jellyfish. Problem solved.
Just make
Right.
jellyfish.
And I can prove this to you. I can prove this to you. I can prove to you that the hardy generalists are the ones who survive, because if you look at the species left over from all those, they're hardy generalists. They're called relics. The ones that survived the extinction events, they're weeds. Like sharks and crocodiles and
They're not weeds.
centipedes. So you thought I was rushing to get to the end of that one, but I was actually rushing to get to the end of the next one. You distract me too much this period. I blame you. All my other periods had 10 minutes extra.
Well, me too.
It's because we're so enigmatic.
You have negative 10 minutes extra. We're 10 minutes behind the bell. I'm going to start at the bottom on this one. I'm going to start at the bottom on this one. And if we have to catch up with this on Tuesday, you could remind me, but I'm going to try to finish this today. Watch this. In the beginning, life was really simple. And as soon as evolution started to split species, new niches opened up. And check this out. We know that when life comes on land, all of a sudden there's a lot of ways to have life on land, for example. So a bunch of species will pop up at once. That's called punctuated speciation. Like mass speciation. It's when you make new species all at once. Lots of new species. You don't have to draw every line. Don't waste your time trying to make it neat. There's only 4 words in this whole slide. Punctuated speciation is when a new idea pops up, and so boom, you get a whole bunch of species at once. Now, please look up. There will always be some little background extinctions, like somebody gets replaced by another species that does it better. But there are also mass extinctions, what we call punctuated extinctions. We talked about those already. Rapid climate change. Geologic events that change the atmosphere. And you know, if somebody survives, they're going to fill a bunch of empty niches. So we say after the age of something comes an age of something else. And those will have little background extinctions, but you know, mass extinctions happen too. And those will have a bunch of babies too, and we call that pattern punctuated equilibrium, where periods with a bunch of new species lead to periods of not much happening. Then you get a mass extinction that gives you a bunch of new species. That's a rhythm, and we've seen that. Please look up. This mass extinction cleared a bunch of niches, and some of those species had weird legs or whatever that allowed land to be colonized. And after the next mass extinction, life started to move into the air. After the dinosaurs went extinct, we got a whole bunch of mammals. That's because one survivor can punctuated speciation into many niches. So you get this pattern, punctuated equilibrium. And in my last minute, I'll leave you with this question: what's going to be left? When the humans are gone, and we've wiped out maybe half of our planet's species by the end of the century, some kinds of weeds and pests will survive. I don't think we'll ever get rid of the cockroaches. So what if 10 million years from now, there's like herds of giant cockroaches galloping across the prairie?
Let's not. I like that idea.
Huge cockroaches. And like big gliding cockroaches and little agile pollinator cockroaches.
I think that'd be awesome.
And underwater cockroaches. Or what if it's the age of the jellyfish? And there's weird like jellyfish walking around on land.
They sound like Squidward.
Yeah, like that. Or like rats. Giant sea rats.
Yes.
And big like predatory wolf rats. Look, we've seen it in the past. And I gotta remind you, listen to this, we're gonna see it again. After the age of now is gonna come the age of jellyfish or cockroaches or whatever. So we should not talk about extinction because it matters to the species. They were all gonna go extinct anyway, who cares? And life on our planet will continue for a long ass time, so don't worry about the Earth. I think we really gotta worry about mass extinction because we know we need all of our species for our ecosystems to function.
Oh, what?
Do we turn these into